feel free to, so from now on, we are going to be recording this session. So with the option to publish this, as I think that many of the things that we'll be discussing in the remaining minutes will potentially be quite valuable for a lot of people that are seeking to start organizations in this space. All right. So I've already dedicated the Slack channel, and I've said a few things about the note taking. I think we're going to have a short conversation, which I'll be kicking off with a Q&A with Jaan before we open it up really to all of you guys' questions. All right. So without further ado, Jaan, maybe a few words about you. You really have a really strong physics background. You are quite a devoted consequentialist, and you see your comparative advantage and existential risk. And I think you said in your introduction really as a catalyst there. Also, in addition, after being born behind the Iron Curtain in Soviet-occupied Estonia, you then became the computer industry really in Estonia before becoming one of the Skype boys. And since then, since your kind of like really fundamental efforts in getting Skype going, you have since used your ability to really think from first principles and your ability to connect people and to catalyze kind of projects, including your opportunity to fund efforts in incredibly effective ways to reduce existential risks. So I thank you all really for joining today. And I think we're going to be talking a lot about a few of the projects that you actually helped launch throughout the session. But maybe, as a little bit of an introduction at first, what made you initially interested in the AI safety space at first, and how has your thinking on those priorities in safety kind of shifted since then?
Right. So I think I got interested in this topic in 2008 when I stumbled upon Less Wrong. Back then it was kind of overcoming bias and Eliezer's writings there, and I found it seemed that they were saying something that is incredibly important, and when I look around, like nobody was paying attention to that. So I shot the Eliezer an email, and we met up in March 2009, 11 years ago, and basically I went from there because I really got convinced that this is important. Now, one thing that has changed over time as the kind of community has grown and there have been like more and more viewpoints, is that I've become like much less certain about the future. Initially, I was like very strongly bought into Eliezer's like hard takeoff. The world is ending in a few minutes after AI starts building itself or improving itself. But now I do think I give like significant probability mass, as in like definitely double digits, more than 10%, to more complex views by, for example, Paul Cristiano, or like AI impacts, and so it's I think it's, yeah, I got kind of more humble in terms of epistemics, I would say.
Oh wow, okay, yeah, I think it's interesting to see how the community kind of like updates together over the years, and I think that that this one is quite prominent for, I think, really updating quite effectively. So so I think that we can talk a little bit about your other worries in terms of existential risk, for example, as they pertain to biological risk, and about COVID in a second. But I think to focus on AI for just a minute, you, in the way in which you kind of like propel projects in that space, and the way in which you started, is that you don't have one kind of like umbrella organization, but you have like an investment arm with which you fund a few AI related projects, and you also have a nonprofit that funds a variety of different organizations. So kind of like initially, do you think differently about your investments to your philanthropic efforts, or do you think they're basically tracking the same thing?
Oh yeah, so I do indeed spend quite a lot of time on just investments, and I have like portfolio of like well over 100 startups by now, and and in this investment portfolio, there are like a few categories or few classes of investments, and definitely one category I call kind of strategic investments, where I don't necessarily invest in order to kind of make a good ROI on investment, but I do think like how the world would change if that company would be successful. For example, like in general, I'm very cynical and skeptical about healthcare investments. I think this is like corrupt marketplace, so it's kind of very difficult to look at technology and make predictions about whether this thing is going to be successful or not, because it doesn't really depend on technology so much. But like still, there are a few things that I've invested in healthcare because like if they, against all odds, end up being successful, the world would be just a much better place. And also, like I've done a few investments in AI companies in order to, most prominently DeepMind, in order to kind of connect the AI community with AI safety community. Yes, and also I do think that there's this concept of impact investing, and I have kind of sort of, it's not obvious. Is like how does this thing work? Because it's like a basic truth that if you're trying to optimize for two separate things on a very high level, you're not going to get like best from either thing. So like if you're a for-profit organization that is trying to do impact, that's trying to maximize the impact, well, like you sort of have to choose, like, are you going to go for profit or are you going to go for impact, at least on a naive level? On the other hand, like basically what I'm saying is that like if you're not for profit, then you're less constrained in what you can do. You can kind of directly address tragedy of commons. On the other hand, like these commercial constraints can be kind of usefully constraining, because you will end up in a nice short-term feedback loop. So yeah, I do think that there is like a definite overlap between my kind of investment activities and in my philanthropic activities.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, I mean, I think as a consequentialist, there's also this concept of like earning to give, but I think that even if you're earning to give, that even when you're earning, the two aren't mutually exclusive, as to still be trying to monitoring or tracking at least some kind of good. But I think we're going to also talk a little bit about investment in the session with Luke later, as it pertains to AI risk. I think for now, you've kind of co-founded and founded and have been kind of like at the inception of a variety of really kind of like quite crucial organizations in the space. One of them, is the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. Then it's the Future of Life Institute, MetaMed, and you also donate to a variety of organizations in the space. For example, Future of Humanity Institute, Global Catastrophic Risk Institute, MIRI, and so on and so forth. So the list is really long. Could you maybe say in a few words about what was the founding story about, for example, FLI and the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, how you came about founding those two, and what space do you see the two occupying in the space of existential risk?
So kind of when I entered this existential risk racket, then I kind of immediately thought that, okay, like what are my kind of comparative advantages, what I can bring? And like one obvious thing was just funding, but the other one was also very obvious to me, was kind of brand. So so when I have functioned as like a co-founder, I definitely basically just have invested my brand into this, and this is like a prime example of working as a catalyst. Therefore, like I can tell the founding stories, but I don't think they're super relevant, that they were sort of like coincidences. Like for example, with Future of Life Institute, it was Max who already knew from before. He said that he had just finished his book, and because he was writing this book, his first book, he had cleared up a lot of crap from his calendar, and now that he had finished the book, he said that like, I want to fill up the like empty space with something meaningful rather than like bring back the crap. So he thought that, okay, I would like to start this institute, and can I be my co-founder? I was like, sure. And with Hugh Price, he has actually written like a New York Times article about how Center for Study of Existential Risk, CSER, got started. And that was just like me selling AI risk to him in a taxi cab in Copenhagen.
Oh wow! Well, that's quite a romantic story. Do you still have, if people are thinking of founding organizations or in the process thereof, do you have any kind of like personal tips of how they may go about founding a new org, or what's important there to know from the get-go?
Oh, there's so many things, and I don't think there's a kind of I don't think I have a kind of top three. The things that just come to mind, for example, kind of going back to one of the earlier questions, sort of for-profit and not-for-profit. So like the nice thing about for-profits is that even if it's kind of like for-profit in order to have impact, is that you have kind of your work cut out for you. You know what the short-term things are like, and you know what is the core of this thing that you're recruiting people. Whereas like if you're doing like not-for-profit, it's much harder to kind of coordinate people. And I've learned a lot from Andrew Critch, actually, with whom I've worked for the last couple of years. And he says that like when you're trying to do like a non-profit, people come like, it's hard. It's much more like herding cats, because people expect to be their voices heard much more than they would if they kind of join as like 10th employee of a for-profit institute. So that's one important thing to keep in mind. Like if you're doing not-for-profit, expect it to be like way more egalitarian for the good and for the bad. It surprises many people.
All right. Yeah, that is definitely that is definitely like a feature in a bug, you could say, to some extent. All right. I think if you just, let's say, like survey the AI safety landscape for a moment, which areas do you think are we doing well in already, and where do you think we could flex our muscles a little bit more in? So which kind of like over the course of the years that you've been kind of like catalyzing those organizations, where do you actually think that we have a good grasp already at a problem, and where do you think, oh, actually we need more capacity in this area?
So I think strategically, I have this model that I've now been calling drill and the city. So the idea is that imagine like a drilling operation where there is like a drill going into the earth, and there's like a small city or like village around it that is basically taking the products and or taking the stuff that the drill pumps up and is productizing those things. So like the AI industry is like that. So you have like a drill going deeper into the technologies of intelligence or algorithmic improvements, going from like I don't know, linear regression to convex optimization to the latest stuff is like transformers and things like that. And then you get those technologies, and those get packaged into products and services. So I think there's like a booming industry of like AI ethics, but they only focus on what's happening above ground. So it's like, and I think there's like a lot of expertise that can be kind of reused from technology ethics in general. So that's why a lot of people think correctly that they are kind of experts on AI ethics. But the thing is that they don't even know that there's something that's happening on the ground. I mean, technically they know that, yeah, there are like kind of seem to be some new papers coming out or something. But like the interesting question is, the thing that attracted me, interesting question is, can you have an AI lab accident? So if the answer is yes, and that's actually the possibility of which got me involved in this, like when Eliezer basically says that, look, we're going to have an AI lab accident where AI starts improving itself, then like the world will basically blow up before you get the productized the result. So I do think that in strategic picture, there is increasing amounts of work being done in the AI ethics space, which means constraining AI-enabled products and services. And there's like a very little work. I think Critch has been counting the numbers in like kind of less than 20 PhDs are working full time on what happens at the tip of the drill. Like how can we kind of constrain intelligence in general and do the work of sort of either from first principles or kind of empirically.
Okay, and do you think this type of work should be done in existing organizations? Do you think we need to kind of like grow capacity more there, or do you think that there is actually like something to be said of starting like a new effort that focuses specifically on this?
I would really like to see there be more effort, because right now what happens at the tip of the drill, the work is only done in the 4 cities in the world. San Francisco, OpenAI, London, DeepMind, Oxford FHI, and Berkeley, of course, a couple of organizations there, plus like a smattering of academicians, etc. But like in terms of organizations, yeah, I perhaps incorrectly, but I'm not aware of people doing kind of fundamental AI safety in the same way that yeah, Miri is doing or DeepMind's safety team is doing. So I would really like to have like more. In fact, like one thing on once this COVID thing kind of lifts, is on my roadmap is to kind of take Rich on a roadshow to different AI labs in the world to present his work on where he for the last 2 years, he and his colleagues have been working on kind of breaking down the AI safety research and AI safety, building like AI safety research agenda.
Yeah, it's a quite comprehensive agenda, I think, that is available also on Christian's website, correct?
I don't think they have published it yet, although my information is like a couple of weeks old. The agenda is called Arches, at least tentatively.
Okay, well then I'm not even aware of it. I think
yeah, it's really awesome, at least based on the draft.
Okay, I was thinking of just of the general principles that are on Paul's website, but I think Andrew actually was interested in doing a session at this meeting on that map. So that is
right. So I think he is going to talk about that. Yep. I highly suggest it. It's just so good.
Okay, well, I'm hoping that we'll get a peek into that map soon. Okay, so if you think about, I mean, you've already talked about kind of like, I guess the spatial spread of the different places in which AI and AI safety is happening or not happening. Do you think from your kind of like, you know, from your experience in a few geographical contexts, how do you think the kind of like existential risk landscape differs? Let's say Europe versus US. Are there any kind of specifics that if people were hoping to start organizations in one versus another that they should be aware of when tackling problems?
Yeah, I don't think I have like a very good answer there, because right now there are just sort of concrete people who, some of them happen to be in Europe, some of them happen to be in the US, and there isn't like enough people to kind of start averaging and looking at kind of cultural differences there. So it's just right now, like in terms of like the fundamental AI safety research, I'm not kind of less knowledgeable about. I mean, I could talk about the AI ethics things. I have like some window into that, but I don't think it's super important to discuss right now.
Okay, so we're not even there yet to tackle that problem. Okay, good. So I think one thing that you know, you shared with me before the meeting were the notes that you recently did on the current crisis, and I've had a look at it, and they're quite comprehensive. And so I would love.
I mean, importantly, like I just started the document. But like most of the content actually has been kind of contributed to by other people.
Yes. Okay. Well, okay. So basically, to bring the others up to speed, there is a living document that Jaan is at least curating, and it has a lot of discussion on how we can leverage COVID-19 in the general context of existential risk. And you know, there's a few kind of like general points that you talk about in there, but perhaps it's interesting to note for others here too. What were the main findings that you have in that doc?
I mean, this document is still kind of being commented on, etc. And like but really the idea is that like post-COVID crisis, I would expect people to be kind of taking more serious, kind of species-wide problems are hopefully going to be taken much more seriously post-COVID, as people kind of remember this, especially like kind of like bio issues, obviously. But the question is like, can we kind of generalize from it? And for example, like Singapore seems to be getting like a lot of praise for their current ability to handle things. So, and I happen to know like many people in Singaporean administration. So I'm kind of glad to see that they're kind of. I've noticed before that they seem to be fairly sane government. I mean, they have the quirks, right, caning at all, etc. But they seem to be fairly rational. I'm kind of glad to see that they seem to be kind of doing well on this particular axis. Now the question is, can we use that kind of shift of mindset to generally promote kind of rationality? I once heard a podcast by the guest of the podcast was Eric Weinstein. He made this claim that like everything about war is awesome except the horrible price, of course, that you have to pay. But the idea is that like if you have wartime, it kind of surfaces more rational leadership and kind of suppresses the usual kind of zero-sum social games that happen in governance. So like it's plausible that the COVID crisis will it's like in some ways like a vaccine for humanity that might kind of promote like a allergic reaction or like not allergic reaction, but kind of immune reaction to that by making kind of the governance of the species to what degree we have it more rational. For example, UN was started like post World War II, right? So like there is like kind of precedents that war actually creates this window during which we can kind of promote things. So yeah, like the things that have been discussed in that document are things like just for example, just kind of in order to elongate that window of rationality, just think about the mimetic things, like what is the narrative that we should be promoting, and the ways to promote things are kind of working with kind of popular content creators, for example, or we can kind of create prizes, like for example, Future of Life Institute does have prizes already in order to kind of promote messages that we think are useful for the species. Then yes, and the other thing that we were thinking about, like indeed kind of looking at which governments actually were better at dealing with this and trying to kind of use them as examples. As good examples to make the rest of the planet more rational. And also, things like prediction markets. I just gave a bunch of money to Metaculus because they have like pandemic specific sub site, and so they can kind of increase their prices, etc. To actually, I do think that having more decisions based on kind of objective predictions would be good for the species, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. We used Metaculus at Vision Weekend to do like a year-long forecasting tournament, and we're going to give out a prize for that as well later this year. And I think to your two earlier points, I think Tom Khalil with the Schmidt Futures, they're already doing some grant making, at least for COVID-19. That's not really a prize, so it's lacking this kind of like public aspect of it. But at least there's some grant making happening that we're going to be talking about later. And I think in the session with Mark and Christine, we're also going to be talking a little bit about, I guess, like which types of governance systems may be better or worse for this type of crisis. But I think what you mentioned of like there's this vacuum right now, to claim the narrative and to actually kind of like do something substantial, I think is something important to consider. So I don't know, I think you're limiting the number of folks on the document to about 100, but perhaps if people are interested to having access and to actively contributing, they could shoot you a message or something, and you can get from there instead.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I'm deliberately trying to kind of keep it small for now too, so people wouldn't be like, it's kind of like Chatham House rules reason. Like I don't want people to be kind of like commenting as if they were in a public discussion.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that point's taken. I think I would love to hand it over to a few participant questions, and if you'd like to either raise your hand here in this meeting, or if you'd like to, let's see, if you have a question, I think just feel free to ask right away, either here or on Slack.
I can see Andrew.
Andrew Rogers, you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. I like the analogy about the drill and then the cities around it. We really can't see what's at the tip of the drill. I actually do a lot of work for the governments doing surveillance of advanced computer science that is not public, and designing programs around it. So my question is to what extent do you think we really have an insight into how many drills there actually are out in the world, and the kinds of ways we can actually kind of keep tabs on that? My sense actually is from the work I've done is that we have a far less of we see what we can see from the academic, the people who publish a lot, but what has concerned governments is that when we start looking around and doing more systematic surveillance, we find other things that really are not on the radars of the popular AGI, call it meme sphere, communication channels.
Oh yeah, so it's totally possible that there are sort of covered things happening. Now there is at least one counter argument to there being like a lot of covered progress that humanity is making towards AGI, and that is, or actually like more specific argument that governments are not investing heavily towards kind of superhuman capabilities when it comes to like on general spectrum superhuman capabilities, and that is somebody pointed out that it's actually way easier to hire top-level AI talent than it is to hire top-level cryptography talent. And we know that governments are heavily investing in cryptography, and that's why it's kind of very difficult to start like a cryptography company and get like top-level talent, or even like computer security. It seems to be like really tough market to get people to join kind of the sort of X-risk or AI safety community. But like, yeah, DeepMind was basically the core of the DeepMind was just like a mechanism to hire talent. What Demis did was just like fly around the world and talk to the top professors in different universities, and made sure that they got options in DeepMind. so they would send their top students to DeepMind. So that's like a counter argument why there probably aren't like that many, but it's not super strong counter argument. I would definitely be interested in having a better understanding of what's actually happening on this planet.
All right, thank you, great. Anyone else? Feel free to raise your hand even in person. Yeah, Miron.
Yeah, so for others that may be interested in donating or investing, do you have a list of organizations that you're involved in and maybe an investment thesis for each one?
Yeah, so actually like one thing that, again, Andrew Gritch has helped me recently, or has kind of spearheaded, and also Oliver Habruka from Less Wrong has been contributing a lot in terms of kind of code. Like we've been working on a system that we call S-Process, and right now it's still like in a beta mode. We're going to do like a third grant round, but the idea is that it should be like a scalable process for for kind of involving, like fairly painlessly involving additional donors in a way that doesn't. I mean, I could talk very long about this process. It's a wonderful thing, but okay, let me just like quick mental image is that the idea is that there is like imagine like a 3-layer neural network. At the bottom you have this what we call opportunities, basically people or organizations who apply for grants. Second layer we have recommenders, and they are basically people who investigate the opportunities. And then on top we have donors, and the job of the recommenders is to rate. We have like this marginal value function, like 3 parameters they have to give to each of the links, and then the job of the donors is to rate the recommenders. So it's like it's a really, and the idea is you can basically build up a tree from these like 3-layer structures. So the idea is that as we kind of will be debugging this mechanism, and we're trying to get like more and more donors involved there. Yeah, hopefully it will be like something that people could be like fairly painlessly participate without actually having to build their own kind of non-profit philanthropy organization.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, wow, that's neat. Okay, very cool. Then I saw Georg having his hand up.
Yes, thank you. Jaan, do you perceive any blind spots in the institutional AGI environment? Or put differently, if you could implement a new institution tomorrow which does something different from the existing institutions, what would that be?
Yeah, I don't have like a very good object level thoughts there. I mean, for the last decade, what I've been doing is just like kind of like letting others do the initial work and kind of like supporting them a little and see like yeah, which one of them actually grow and are sustainable. So one thing definitely what is happening, seems to be happening, is that the rest of the world is kind of waking up. Even without the COVID crisis, are kind of getting more and more interested in what will become of our species. And I don't think the kind of the community who has been working on this for the last 10 years and has their own internal shibboleth is like super well positioned to do this outreach. So like one thing that is really valuable, I do think, is sort of like a buffer between the places like Alignment Forum, where like really top level AI-safety research is being discussed, and the rest of the world, where people are kind of like concerned, but they don't know like very common mistake that I see, especially in the East, by the way. I've been going to China and Japan quite a lot recently, is that people confuse competence and consciousness. So it's like very simple mistake, I think. People say that, well, machines get more and more competent and more smart, and then suddenly become conscious. But we don't know anything about consciousness, so like let's not worry about it. It's like, yeah, many mistakes in that sentence. But so this is an example of how there might be like valuable organizations in the middle who basically understand both the fundamentals, but also understand the mindset of the rest of the planet.
Okay, neat.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Raise your hand if you'd like, even in person. Yeah, Said Joseph.
So I had a question for those of us who are working on some of that sort of what you talked about, surface level AI alignment work in constraint approaches. How would you, I guess, what would you recommend in getting to a point to work at the transformer level or closer to the tip of the drill? How do you recommend like switching over to that kind of space?
Yeah, so I mean, once Andrew Critch's roadmap is out, it's like just super comprehensive. You can just basically like yeah, it's like a tree. Basically, you can go and like, I'm interested in this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. Okay, then you have like a list of papers that have been have already been published in this, and like a very thorough explanation of what is this particular leaf of this research tree that you're looking at. So I think like that is like my immediate suggestion. Just wait until this thing is, or like, yeah, attend Andrew Critch's session if he's
what's his?
If he's going to have that.
He was going to have a session.
EA Global.
This meeting, but he and EA Global, and at this meeting, but he couldn't attend anymore. That being said, I think it's fair to say that he's probably happy to talk to you about it if you reach out to him. And yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. And he has also written, like, if you go to I think it was Chai's website, where he has this like annotated bibliography, and so he already has like some published pointers.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Thank you very much.
All righty. Any other questions? Feel free to literally raise your hand in the video.
Yep, Dan.
Yes, I guess I had a similar question to Sai. I've been thinking a lot about explainability and robustness, and there's an enormous number of people working on those topics. So I was wondering, how can we tie all of that work into longer term AI safety issues, or do you think that they're actually disconnected?
So my model is that most of the like near-term work on this, like on the city level, which is about like face recognition and like very particular narrow products and services, isn't very useful when it comes to kind of making sure that we're not going to be killed as species. However, the things that you mentioned, like the explainability and transparency, I think they have like the best shot of actually being relevant both in the short term and in the long term, because like explainable things are commercially valuable. So you get the immediate kind of gradient, incentive gradient to work against. On the other hand, explainable and transparent things are, I think Critch makes that argument, are much less likely to defect, or much less likely to do like a treacherous turn, and which are kind of like firmly concepts from this underground AI safety research.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone else with a question? We have 5 minutes, so we could squeeze in another question if you'd like. Yes, Roxanne.
Hi. Sort of on that note, for the things that there aren't as much of a market mechanism to implement, are you worried that there's going to be a gap in translating, especially the kind of safety work that Miri does, and maybe to a less extent the kind that Paul and are doing, and like actually getting the relevant groups to implement them? And if so, do you think there's like a space to have some sort of initiative to transfer technical safety work into applied projects?
Yeah, just yes. I mean, it's kind of also, it is important to think about the applicability domain of this like fundamental AI safety research. Like, it's not like most of the work that happens, most of the capabilities work that happens like above ground is like taking existing research, perhaps even existing code, and then training the AI for this particular domain. For example, I do think like face recognition, most of the work, commercial work, is just doesn't really do like fundamental research so much than just actually training and debugging the systems, etc. So like there is like less work, or less, kind of less relevant. Like the fundamental research that Miri, for example, is doing is much less relevant in those things. But like there are definitely like fundamental AI research labs out there that, to my knowledge, don't really care about the impacts. Like, I mean, previously at least, Google Brain used to be one. I'm not sure how things have been developing recently. Perhaps they have like become like more responsible over time. But like from what I heard, some ex Google Brain researchers were that seems to be like actively toxic environment used to be. Importantly, about talking about AI safety. So like, yeah, this is like definitely something that I really would like to see. Like, whenever there are fundamental AI research groups in academia or well-funded companies, like that they would be actually kind of like know what the problem is and wouldn't dismiss it.
All right, thank you. I think, is there another question? We have about a minute left.
Hi.
Yes.
I have a question.
Hello.
It's about the quantum computing and its influence on AGI or strong AI. Could you see the potential of the development of quantum computing can have a big impact on the development of AGI?
Yeah, it totally can. Like the basically, my main model is that quantum computing also, together with other kind of techniques like 3D chips. What is this thing? The photonics stuff. Basically, techniques that are able to massively accelerate the amount of computing operations that you can do per second. This is like not good. Like my model. One way I've been saying is that the remaining runway that humanity has is not measured in wall clock time. It's measured in clock cycles. So like there's like amount of like compute operations that we now have left. So whenever somebody comes up with something that can do a lot of computation in very short time, they effectively kind of squeeze this runway, and we have like less physical time left to get our house in order. So like yeah, I think quantum computing, if they kind of manage to solve it in a way that provides many more compute cycles, then we should expect there be even less time to do our homework.
All right. Okay. And with that being said, we're now at 11. You're ending right on time. So I would all encourage you now to head on over into the main Zoom room again. And we're going to do a little report out there, Jan. So get ready for that. Thank you all so much for bearing with this. I hope you had a great session. And yeah, I can't wait to see you in a second again in a different room. All righty. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.